August 1941. The German war machine is invincible. They have crushed Europe, and now they are swallowing Russia whole, 20 meters a day. Near the city of Dinsk, a German panzer crew spots a lone Soviet soldier in a clearing. They aren't afraid. Why would they be? He isn't holding a machine gun. He isn't holding an anti-tank rifle. He is holding a ladle. He is cooking soup. They laughed at him. They thought he was prey. They didn't know that Ivan Serida was holding an axe behind his back, and he was about to do the impossible. To understand how a single man with a piece of firewood chopping equipment defeated a 20-ton steel fortress, we first have to understand the man they laughed at. Ivan Pavlovich Chera was not a commando. He was not trained in demolition. He was not a sniper. In the eyes of the 91st Tank Regiment of the Red Army, Ivan was just the cook. It was early August. The atmosphere in the regiment was grim. They were retreating through Latvia, pushed back by the relentless blitzkrieg of the Wehrmacht. The men were exhausted. Their uniforms were caked in dust and dried blood, the only bright spot in their day. The only thing that reminded them they were still human was the field kitchen. Ivan manned the trailer. It was a heavy iron beast on 2 wheels, smelling of boiled buckwheat, pork fat, and cabbage. While the tank crews spent their hours oiling the breeches of their T-26 tanks, checking the tension on their tracks, and studying maps of the inevitable retreat, Ivan spent his time chopping wood. The other soldiers teased him constantly. It was a defense mechanism, humor in the face of death. When a tank commander walked by Ivan chopping wood for the stove, he'd kick a log and say, "Hey, Ivan, make sure you don't burn the porridge today. It's the last meal we might eat." Another would joke, "Look at him. We fight with 45mm cannons. Ivan fights with a spoon. If the Germans come, what will you do, Ivan? Splash them with hot soup." Ivan didn't get angry. He was a large man, physically imposing with hands the size of shovels, but he had a gentle demeanor. He would simply smile, wipe the sweat from his forehead with a rag, and say, "A soldier cannot fight on an empty stomach. You kill the fascists. I will make sure you have the strength to do it." But deep down, Ivan was frustrated. He had requested a transfer to a combat unit 3 times. 3 times his commanding officer had denied it. He was told they had plenty of boys who could pull a trigger, but nobody else who could make a stew out of tree bark and old boots. He was ordered to stay with the kitchen. So Ivan stayed. He carried his resentment in silence, channeling his energy into the wood he chopped. He used a standard issue carpenter's axe. It wasn't a weapon. It was a tool, a heavy single-bit head, a worn wooden handle polished smooth by months of use. It weighed about 2 kilo, heavy enough to split birch logs with a single swing. On the morning of August 14th, that axe was resting against the wheel of the field kitchen. At 07 hours, orders came down from Division HQ. The regiment was to move out. Intelligence reported a German armored column flanking their position to the north. The Soviet tanks fired up their engines, spewing blue smoke into the morning air. The ground shook. The battalion commander shouted for Ivan to pack it up, warning him they moved in 10 minutes, but the soup wasn't ready. The buckwheat was still hard. Ivan pleaded for time. He asked for just 1 hour to finish the meal, promising to catch up. The commander looked at the sky where German bombers had been prowling since dawn, but he looked at his hungry men and nodded. He gave Ivan 1 hour. By 07:30, the regiment was gone. The clearing was empty, save for the smoking field kitchen, the horse grazing on nearby grass, and Ivan Serida. The silence of the forest was heavy. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before a predator strikes. Ivan checked the fire. He stirred the large iron cauldron. He tasted the broth. Needs salt. Then Ivan heard it. It wasn't the sound of his own regiment. That rumble had faded to the east. This sound was coming from the west. It started as a vibration in the soles of his boots, then the distinctive clatter of metal tracks on dry earth, squeaking bogey wheels, the high-pitched whine of a Maybach engine. Yvonne froze. He knew the sounds of Soviet engines. This was different. This engine sounded tighter. Precision engineering. German. The driver assigned to the kitchen cart went pale. He whispered that a tank was coming. Ivan grabbed the reins of the horse and ordered the driver to get the animal into the trees. Ivan grabbed his old bolt-action rifle from the cart. Against infantry, it was deadly. Against a tank, it was a toothpick. The trees at the edge of the clearing parted. 2 tanks emerged. They were Panzer-38Ts, gray paint, white crosses. Inside those steel shells sat men who were confident. They were deep in enemy territory, the masters of the battlefield. Ivan dove into the underbrush behind the kitchen trailer just as the lead tank swiveled its turret. The dark eye of the cannon swept across the clearing. The tank stopped. The engines idled, a guttural purr. The German commander in the lead tank opened his hatch. He stood up, scanning the area with binoculars. He saw the smoking field kitchen. He saw the steam rising from the pot. He smelled the buckwheat and pork. He laughed. He shouted something to the second tank. The second tank revved its engine and turned, bypassing the clearing to continue scouting the road ahead. The lead tank remained. They wanted the food. The German tank rolled forward slowly and stopped just 10 minutes from where Ivan was hiding. The engine cut off. The sudden silence was deafening. Ivan watched through the ferns. He saw the hatches open. The crew began to climb out. They were laughing, talking loudly. They were relaxed. They assumed the Russians had fled in panic. There were 4 of them. They left their submachine guns inside the turret. Why carry heavy weapons to get a bowl of soup? Yvonne looked at his rifle. If he fired, he might get one. The others would dive back into the tank, button up, and shred him with the machine guns. He needed something else. He needed shock. He needed violence of action. His eyes fell on the axe. It was leaning against the trailer wheel right next to him. The same axe the officers had laughed at. The cook's tool. Yvonne put down the rifle. He reached out and wrapped his massive hand around the smooth wooden handle. The German crew was gathered around the field kitchen. One of them was reaching for a ladle. Ivan Serida exploded from the bushes. He didn't scream yet. He moved with the terrifying speed of a man possessed. He was a bear of a man charging across the 10 meters of open ground. The German standing nearest the tank saw him first. His eyes went wide. He shouted, "Russian!" The crew scrambled. They panicked. The sight of a giant, enraged Soviet cook sprinting at them with an axe broke their discipline completely. They dove back toward the tank. Ivan reached the tank just as the last German was dropping into the turret. The commander was trying to close the heavy steel hatch. Ivan swung. He didn't swing at the man. He swung at the tank. The axe struck the side of the hull. The sound rang out like a church bell. The hatch slammed shut. The locks clicked. The Germans were inside. Ivan was outside. Now the dynamic had shifted. The Germans were safe behind steel. Yvonne was standing on open ground, armed with a piece of wood and iron. The tank engine roared back to life. Black smoke puffed from the exhaust. The tank lurched forward. Most men would have run. A tank is a moving fortress. Ivan didn't run. He climbed. He scrambled up the rear fender, hauling his bulk onto the engine deck. The tank jerked, turning its turret. The Germans were trying to shake him off, or worse, bring the machine gun to bear. Inside the tank, panic was setting in. The commander was shouting orders. The turret gunner spun the wheel, rotating the machine gun towards the rear. Ivan saw the barrel turning toward him. He was standing on the engine deck, balancing as the tank rocked and swayed. He saw the black hole of the machine gun barrel swinging his way. He raised the axe. This wasn't a log. This was crop steel. Ivan didn't care. With a roar that shook the forest, Ivan brought the axe down. Not on the armor, on the barrel of the machine gun. The heavy steel head of the carpenter's axe struck the delicate precision-machined barrel. It bent inside the tank. The gunner pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the bent metal of the barrel. The gun jammed catastrophically. The breech smoked. Ivan struck again. He hit the vision slits, the narrow glass blocks that allowed the commander and driver to see out. The impact shattered the reinforced glass. They were blind. The tank began to spin in circles. The driver couldn't see. The commander couldn't see. They knew something was on the hull. A monster, a demon, bashing in their eyes and destroying their weapons. Ivan was systematically dismantling a war machine with a 2-ruble axe. He moved to the turret hatch. He hammered on it with the back of the axe head. He started screaming. He didn't scream like a cook. He screamed like a battalion. "Bring up the grenades!" he roared, his voice booming against the steel. "Surround them! Anti-tank squad! Prepare charges! Blow them to hell!" Inside the steel box, the acoustics were terrifying. The hammering sounded like artillery. The shouting sounded like 100 men. The German commander was sweating. He looked at his men. They were young, terrified. They couldn't see outside. They only knew that their machine gun was destroyed. Their vision was gone. And apparently an entire Soviet anti-tank squad was stacking explosives on their engine deck. In reality, there was no squad. There were no grenades. There was only Ivan. Ivan grabbed a piece of heavy canvas tarp from his belt, meant for covering the firewood. He slapped it over the remaining vision blocks. Now they were truly in the dark. The tank stopped moving. The engine idled nervously. Ivan leaned close to the turret hatch. He hammered it again. "Surrender or we drop the grenades down the hatch. I count to 3. 1, Ivan shouted to the empty forest. "Prepare charges." 2, he clicked his axe against the metal. Inside, the German commander broke. He believed he was about to be destroyed. Slowly the hatch began to open. A hand appeared, then a white cloth. Ivan stepped back, raising his rifle, which he had slung over his shoulder during the climb. He aimed it at the hatch. "Get out!" he shouted, hands high. One by one, 4 members of the elite Panzer Corps climbed out of their tank. They expected to see a squad of hardened Soviet shock troops. They saw a field kitchen, a grazing horse, and one large, angry cook holding an axe. Yvonne forced them to the ground. He made them tie each other's hands with rope from the kitchen supplies. He stood over them, axe in one hand, rifle in the other. An hour later, the ground shook again. Yvonne's regiment was returning. They had heard the distant noise and feared the worst. The battalion commander led the column, expecting to find a burning kitchen and a dead cook. Instead, as the dust settled, the commander stopped his jeep. His mouth fell open. The entire regiment halted behind him. Soldiers climbed out of trucks, staring in disbelief. There sat Yvonne Serida, stirring the soup. Next to him was a pristine German Panzer tank, and sitting in a row, tied up like chickens, were 4 terrified German tankers. Yvonne looked up, wiped his hands on his apron, and pointed to the pot. "Comrade Commander," he said calmly, "the soup is ready." But just as the Evos regiment began to cheer, a scout came sprinting from the tree-line, his face white with fear. He pointed back toward the road. "More tracks!" he screamed. The rest of the column turned around. "They're coming back." Ivan looked at his axe. He looked at the captured tank. The commander looked at Ivan. The celebration died instantly. The first tank was a miracle. But now the real fight was about to begin. The celebration in the clearing had lasted exactly 14 seconds. 14 seconds of laughter and disbelief before the scout's scream tore through the air. They're coming back. The dust on the horizon wasn't just a patrol, it was the main body of the German armored column. The Panzer-38 12 Ivan had captured was just the tip of the spear. The shaft was made of Tiger tanks, mechanized infantry, and artillery, and they were 2 mi away. The battalion commander didn't panic. He looked at the captured tank. He looked at the terrified German prisoners. Then he looked at Ivan Serida. "Serida!" the commander barked. "Get inside!" Ivan blinked. "Comrade, Colonel, I am a cook." "Not anymore," the colonel said. "You're the only one who has been inside that thing. Get in the turret. Find the maps. Find the radio codes. We need to know exactly what is coming down that road before they turn us into ash." Yvonne climbed back onto the engine deck. The metal was still hot. He dropped into the commander's cupola. It smelled of oil, sweat, and the fear of the men he had just captured. He found the map case leather-bound and stamped with the Eagle of the Reich. He handed it down to the colonel. The colonel threw the map open on the hood of his jeep. His eyes widened. The red lines drawn by the German command didn't just show a flanking maneuver. They showed an encirclement. The column coming toward them wasn't just hunting the 91st Regiment. It was closing a steel noose around the entire division. If Ivan hadn't stopped this tank, if he hadn't delayed the lead scouts, the regiment would have marched blindly into a massacre. The soup had saved them. The axe had saved them. "Mount up!" the colonel screamed. "Drivers, kill the engines. We ambush them here." The regiment scrambled. The T-26 tanks, hopelessly outgunned in a head-to-head fight, drove into the treine, burying their hulls in the ferns. Infantry dug frantic foxholes. The captured German tank was pushed into the bushes, camouflaged to look like it, was simply parked, waiting for its friends. Yvonne was ordered back to the kitchen trailer. He grabbed his rifle and his axe. He lay in the dirt next to the wheel, watching the road. At 09:15, the lead elements of the German main force arrived. They didn't expect a fight. They saw their scout tank parked on the side of the road. They assumed the sector was clear. The lead German half-track slowed down, the driver waving at the silent Panzer. The Soviet T-26 opened fire at point-blank range. The forest exploded. For 20 minutes, the clearing became a slaughterhouse. But this time, the Soviets had the element of surprise. The German column, caught in a choke point, couldn't deploy its heavy armor. Burning half-tracks blocked the road. The colonel used the German maps to call in artillery strikes on the exact coordinates of the German rear guard. By 10 a.m., the invincible German column was retreating. The 91st Regiment hadn't just survived. They had bloodied the nose of a superior force. That night, the camp was different. Nobody made jokes about the soup. Nobody kicked the firewood. When Ivan Serida walked to the fire to serve dinner, the men parted like the Red Sea. They looked at his hands, the hands that had bent a machine gun barrel. They looked at the axe hanging from his belt. The colonel called Ivan to the front of the assembly. He held up the bent barrel of the German machine gun, which had been pried off the captured tank. "This," the colonel said, holding the twisted metal up to the firelight, "is what conviction looks like. Serida requested a transfer to the combat units 3 times. I denied him 3 times. The colonel paused. "I was wrong." Yvonne Serida was officially relieved of his duties as a cook. He was assigned to the reconnaissance platoon. They took his ladle and gave him a deer-off machine gun. But Yvonne kept the axe. He sharpened it every night. It wasn't a tool anymore. It was a talisman. News of the cook with the axe began to spread. It moved up the chain of command from the regiment to the division all the way to the political comars. The Soviet Union was starving for heroes. They needed stories to counter the endless news of defeat. The story of Ivan Serida was perfect. It was the story of the Russian spirit. Unarmed, underestimated, and unbreakable. But Ivan didn't care about the propaganda. He cared about the job. August turned to September. The war grew colder, bloodier. The Germans pushed closer to Moscow. Ivan's unit was tasked with aggressive reconnaissance. This meant operating behind enemy lines, crawling through freezing mud to spot artillery positions. Ivan was good at it. The patience he had learned waiting for water to boil translated perfectly to sniping. He could lie motionless for hours, covered in leaves, watching German patrols walk past his nose. On a gray afternoon in early October, Ivan's squad was deep in the forest near a village occupied by the SS. Their mission was to identify the German command post. They were ghosts moving silently through the birch trees. Then they heard the engine. It was a sound Ivan knew intimately now, a German tank. But this wasn't a light Panzer-38T. This was something heavier, a Panzer IV. It was parked in a depression, hidden from the road, guarding the approach to the village. The crew was outside smoking, relaxing. Ivan signaled his squad to halt. They were outnumbered. The tank had infantry support. A squad of soldiers digging trenches nearby. The smart move was to retreat, mark the coordinates, and call in mortars. But Ivan saw something else. The tank was parked next to an ammunition truck. If that tank started its engine, it would spot Ivan's squad. They would be cut down in the open forest. They couldn't retreat fast enough. Ivan handed his machine gun to the sergeant. He pulled 2 anti-tank grenades from his belt. Heavy, clumsy metal bricks. He looked at the axe on his hip. He shook his head. Not this time. This required silence. "Cover me," Yvonne whispered. "Yvonne, don't be a fool," the sergeant hissed. "That's a Panzer IV. You can't chop it down." "I don't intend to chop it," Yvonne said. "I intend to cook it." Yvonne dropped to his stomach. He began to crawl. This was the second great hunt of Ivan Serida. The first had been a reaction, a burst of adrenaline. This was a calculation. He moved inches at a time. The forest floor was covered in dry leaves. One crunch would end his life. He watched the Germans. They were confident, just like the crew in August. They were laughing, sharing cigarettes. They didn't look at the ground. They looked at the horizon. Ivan reached the edge of the depression. He was 15 minutes from the tank. He could smell the exhaust fumes. He could hear the soldiers talking about letters from home. He pulled the pin on the first grenade. He didn't throw it immediately. He held it. He needed the fuse to burn down. If he threw it too early, they might have time to kick it away. He counted 1, 2, 3. He rose to his knees. He didn't throw it at the tracks. He threw it into the open turret hatch where the commander was sitting on the rim smoking. The throw was perfect. The heavy grenade sailed through the air and vanished into the black hole of the turret. "Fire!" Ivan roared. The explosion was contained, muffled by the steel hull. The tank shuddered violently. Smoke poured from the hatches. The ammunition inside the tank began to cook off. Boom! The secondary explosion blew the turret 5 FT into the air. The shock wave knocked the German infantry off their feet. Ivan didn't wait. He threw the second grenade at the ammunition truck parked next to the burning tank. The truck disintegrated. A fireball rolled through the clearing, consuming the trench line where the German infantry had been digging. Yvonne's squad opened fire with their machine guns, cutting down the survivors who were stumbling in the smoke. It was a chaotic, brutal minute of violence. When the shooting stopped, the clearing was silent except for the crackle of burning gasoline. Yvonne stood up from the grass. He dusted off his knees. His sergeant ran up to him, eyes wide. "You are insane, Serida. You are completely insane." Yvonne watched the burning tank. "The fire was too hot," he muttered. "It would have burned the porridge." They retreated before German reinforcements could arrive. But the legend had grown. Ivan Serida wasn't just the man who captured a tank with an axe. He was now the tank hunter. Weeks passed. Winter began to set in. The Russian winter. The mud froze into rock. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero. The oil in the German guns began to freeze. The tide was slowly, painfully turning. Ivan was promoted to platoon commander. He wore officer's boards now, but he refused to carry a pistol. He carried his rifle and his axe. But the war has a way of balancing the scales. For every miracle, there is a tragedy. In November, Ivan's platoon was holding a defensive line on a hill overlooking a critical river crossing. They were the only thing standing between a German mechanized battalion and the flank of the Soviet army. They dug in. The ground was so hard they had to use explosives to create foxholes. They had no anti-tank guns. They had Molotov cocktails and bundles of grenades. At dawn, the attack came. It wasn't a patrol. It was a wave. 12 German tanks, 200 infantry. Ivan walked the line of his trench. He looked at his men. They were young conscripts shivering in their great coats. They were terrified. "Look at them," Ivan said, pointing at the oncoming steel monsters. "They are big, they are loud, but they are blind. I took one with a piece of wood. You have grenades. You have courage. Let them come close. Let them smell you. Then kill them." The first wave hit the line at 08 Rue. The fighting was hand-to-hand. Bayonets against entrenching tools. Yvonne was in the center firing his rifle until it ran dry, then using the stock as a club. A German tank, a Tiger this time, breached the trench line. It rolled right over the foxholes, crushing men beneath its tracks. It turned toward Ivan's position. Ivan grabbed a bundle of grenades. He scrambled up the side of the trench. He was going to do it again. He was going to climb the beast. He ran toward the Tiger. Machine gun fire kicked up the snow around his feet. He reached the hull. He grabbed the tow cable. He pulled himself up, but this crew was ready. They had learned the hatch didn't open. Instead, the turret spun violently, knocking Ivan off balance. He slid down the frontal armor. He hit the ground hard. As he looked up, the barrel of the 88 MRI cannon lowered directly at his chest. Ivan Serida, the hero of the kitchen, the tank hunter, stared into the black abyss of the muzzle. He reached for his axe. The gun fired. The world turned white. The concussion lifted Ivan off the ground and threw him 10 minutes back into the trench. Darkness swallowed him. When he woke up, there was no sound, no shooting, no screaming, just a ringing in his ears and the feeling of snow on his face. He tried to move his legs. He couldn't. He tried to reach for his axe. His hand grasped empty air. He looked up. The sky was gray, and standing over him were 3 silhouettes. They weren't wearing Soviet uniforms. They were wearing the field gray of the Wehrmacht, and one of them was holding Ivan's axe. The German soldier held the axe. It was poetic in a dark, twisted way. The weapon that had humiliated the Wehrmacht, the tool of the cook, was now in the hands of the enemy. The German officer smiled. He didn't speak Russian, but the intent was clear. He raised the axe high above his head. He wasn't going to shoot even Serida. He was going to butcher him. Ivan watched the blade rise against the gray sky. He couldn't move his legs. His chest felt like it was filled with broken glass. He had no rifle, no grenades, no strength. He closed his eyes. He didn't pray. He thought about the kitchen. He thought about the smell of boiling buckwheat and the sound of dry birch splitting under the blade. He waited for the blow crack. A sound tore through the air, but it wasn't the wet thud of an axe hitting flesh. It was the sharp supersonic snap of a sniper rifle. Ivan opened his eyes. The German officer's smile was gone, replaced by a small red hole in the center of his forehead. The axe slipped from his fingers, tumbling into the snow next to Ivan's head. The German collapsed, falling backward into the mud. The two other German soldiers spun around, raising their MP40s. Crack, crack. Two more shots, two more bodies hitting the frozen ground. From the tree-line, a ghost emerged, a Soviet sniper in white winter camouflage. Then another, then a squad of infantry screaming the battle cry that terrified the invaders. Yura. The counterattack had arrived. Ivan's vision began to blur. The adrenaline that had kept him conscious was fading. He felt hands grabbing his coat. Friendly hands. He heard voices calling for a medic. As the darkness finally took him, his hand moved instinctively. His fingers curled around the wooden handle of the axe lying in the snow. He wouldn't let go. Not this time. Ivan Serida woke up in a field hospital 3 days later. The smell of death was gone, replaced by the stinging scent of iodine and rubbing alcohol. He was alive, but he was broken. The doctors told him the damage was severe. Concussion, shrapnel in the chest, frostbite on his legs. They told him his war was over. They said he would be discharged, sent back to his village in the Ukraine to peel potatoes for the rest of his life. Ivan looked at the doctor. He tried to sit up, groaning as his ribs protested. "Doctor," he rasped, "I did not stop a panzer tank so I could rot in a bed. Patch me up, send me back." The doctor shook his head. "You are a hero, Serida. You have done enough. The German army knows your name. They call you the Veruca Koch, the Mad Cook. If you go back and they catch you, they will not take you prisoner. They will skin you alive." Ivan didn't care. He spent 2 months in that hospital. He fought the recovery like he fought the Germans, with stubborn, angry persistence. He forced himself to walk on damaged legs. He did push-ups until his wounds bled. In January 1942, a staff car arrived at the hospital. A high-ranking political officer stepped out. I wasn't there to discharge Ivan. He was there to decorate him. The decree had come from the Kremlin itself. Signed by the Supreme Soviet, Ivan Pavlovich Serida was to be awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor in the land, the Gold Star. The ceremony was small. Ivan stood at attention, his uniform hanging loosely on his frame. He had lost 30 lobby. The general pinned the Gold Star to his chest, right next to the Order of Lenin. "Comrade Serida," the general said, "you're a symbol. The motherland needs symbols. We want to send you on a tour. Moscow, Leningrad, Stalingrad. We want you to speak to the factory workers. Tell them about the axe. Tell them how you cooked the fascists. It was a safe offer, a comfortable life. Good food, warm beds, adoration." Ivan touched the Gold Star. "Comrade General," he said quietly, "with respect. I am not a speaker. I am a soldier. My boys are still freezing in the trenches. My kitchen is cold. Please send me back." The general looked at the big man. He saw the fire that still burned in his eyes. He signed the papers. Ivan Serida returned to the front. But the war had changed. It wasn't 1941 anymore. The Wehrmacht wasn't invincible. They were being ground down mile by bloody mile. Ivan wasn't a cook anymore. He was promoted to senior lieutenant. He commanded a guards company. He didn't carry the axe into battle anymore. It was kept in his jeep, a relic of the past. But the spirit of the axe remained. He led his men through the horrors of 1943, the Battle of Kursk, the liberation of Kiev. Ivan was a father to his soldiers. He checked their boots for rot. He checked their ammunition pouches, and yes, he checked their soup. He would often walk to the field kitchens of his company, take the ladle from the terrified new cook, and taste the broth. Too much water, he would grumble. Add more fat. A soldier cannot kill Nazis on water. The soldiers loved him. They whispered the legend to the new recruits. That's him. That's the cook. He killed a Tiger tank with his bare hands. He eats German steel for breakfast. But the legend hid the pain. Yvonne was suffering. The wounds from the tank blast never fully healed. His lungs wheezed in the damp cold. His legs ached constantly. He was a young man, only 24 years old, but he walked like an old man. In 1944, during the push into Poland, Ivan was wounded again. A piece of shrapnel to the leg. He refused evacuation. He wrapped it in a dirty bandage and kept leading the assault. I started this in the kitchen, he told his medic. I will finish it in Berlin. May 1945, the end of the world. The Red Army was in Berlin. The city was a burning skeleton of the Reich. The streets were choked with rubble, dead bodies, and the wreckage of the war machine Ivan had spent 4 years fighting. Even Serida stood in the shadow of the Brandenburg Gate. The air smelled of smoke and victory. Soldiers around him were celebrating. They were firing rifles into the air, drinking vodka, dancing to accordions. Ivan didn't dance. He sat on the fender of a jeep. He pulled out his old axe, the handle cracked, the blade chipped and dull. He looked at it. A young private ran up to him, a bottle of wine in his hand. "Comrade Lieutenant, we did it. The war is over. We are going home." Ivan looked at the boy. He smiled, a tired, sad smile. "Yes," he said, "we are going home." He put the axe back in its canvas sheath. The tool had done its job. The wood was chopped. The fire was out. But for Ivan Serida, there was no happily ever after. Real history isn't a movie. The credits don't roll. After the victory parade, Yvonne returned to his village. He was a hero of the Soviet Union. He had the medals, the pension, the respect of the entire nation. He tried to live a normal life. He became the chairman of the village council. He tried to rebuild the home that the war had destroyed, but the war had taken too much. The injuries he had sustained, the concussion from the tank barrel, the multiple shrapnel wounds, the frostbite, the years of sleeping and freezing mud caught up with him. His body began to shut down. The lungs that had breathed in the smoke of burning panzers struggled to breathe the clean air of peace. On November 18th, 1950, just 5 years after the victory he fought so hard for, Ivan Serida died. He was 31 years old. Today, inside the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow, there are thousands of exhibits. There are T-34 tanks. There are captured Nazi flags thrown on the floor. There are the pistols of generals and the maps of marshals. But if you look closely in a quiet corner, you might find a display dedicated to a cook. It doesn't have a golden sword. It doesn't have a diamond-encrusted pistol. It remembers a man who stood alone in a clearing, facing the might of the German blitzkrieg with nothing but courage and a piece of firewood chopping equipment. They laughed at him because he was a cook. They mocked him because he held an axe. But in the end, the 91st Tank Regiment didn't run on gasoline. It ran on the spirit of Ivan Serida. He proved that it doesn't matter what weapon you hold in your hand. It matters what fire burns in your heart. You can have the biggest tank, the thickest armor, the most advanced engineering. But if you run into a man who is fighting for his home, for his brothers, and for his soup, you better hope you brought more than just a tank. If you think Ivan Serida deserves to be remembered, do something for me. Hit that like button. It's not for the algorithm. It's a salute to the cook. And check the description. We found the original combat reports from 1941 confirming the bending of the machine gun barrel. It wasn't a myth. It happened. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories of the impossible. We are digging up the history they don't teach you in school. The history written in blood and iron. My name is James. This was the story of the cook and the tank. Class dismissed.